In this video, we'll discuss how you can dynamically translate the strings in a UX component from one language to another and do this in a PhoneGap application. So what's different about a PhoneGap application and a regular application is that in a PhoneGap application the component is not loaded by making a call to the server. The component is loaded from the file system on the device. So normally when you build applications that need to have language translations for strings, that is done by wrapping the strings in either text dictionary tags or language tags. These are the A5:R or A5:T tags, and then those tags are resolved on the server side. But in the case of a PhoneGap application, you need to do all the work client side. So this sample application here describes a technique that you can use to do client-side language translation. So you can see here we have a simple application that is showing 3 fields, and the labels right now are in English, but I can switch from English to French to German or to Spanish. So let's go now and take a look at how this is actually achieved. So first of all, we'll go back here to the builder and we'll look at the individual fields here. So for the first name field, you can see that the label for the field has been wrapped in a span over here. So there's the label for the field, and the label is wrapped in a span that has a class name of underbar language. So this class name is just used so that we can quickly select these spans. So we actually do not have a CSS tag called underbar language that actually defines the appearance. We're just using this class name as a dummy class name so we can select these span tags quickly. And then here's an ID that basically represents the first name field, and the key part about this is that this ID starts with a special string like underbar language, and then first name is the actual ID of the language value, of the string value that we want to translate. So if we go now to last name, we'll see that last name follows a very similar pattern here. We've got the same class name, and then here's our ID, so it still starts with underbar language, and then we have last name, and then finally city, again using the same pattern. We have the class name of underbar language, and then the ID of underbar language, underbar city. So all of the strings that we want to translate are wrapped inside spans using this pattern. Then if we go to JavaScript here, we can see that in the JavaScript we've got an object here called underbar translations, and this object has an entry for each of the strings that we want to translate. So the first object is last name, then we have first name, and then we have city. So this last name here matches the ID, so you can see this, it matches this portion of the ID. So going back now to the JavaScript here, so we can see that there's our 3 objects that we need to translate, and then for each object we have entries for the various languages that we want to use. So for last name we have an entry for English, French, German and Spanish, and then we have the same thing for first name and for city. So now you can see that if we go back to our drop down over here, this drop down has a list of choices over here, which represent the languages that we would like to let the user select, and then in the onChange event over here we're going to call a function that actually does the translation, passing into the function the value that the user selected. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video and explain how this doTranslate function operates. So we're continuing now looking at how client-side language translations of strings occurs, and we're looking now at this doTranslate function that actually does the work when the user makes a selection in the language drop-down. So we'll go back now to functions, and we'll go to our doTranslate function over here. So this function starts by getting an array of all of the elements that have a class name of underbar language. So you can, as you recall, when we defined the spans for each of the strings that we wanted to translate, we gave them a class name of underbar language. So we now have an array of all of the elements that we want to translate. Then we loop over that array, and for each item in the array, we basically, so this is an item in the array, we basically get the ID of that item. So the first item in the array will have an ID of underbar language, underbar first name. The second item in the array will have an ID of underbar language, underbar last name, and then the third item in the array will have an ID of underbar language, underbar city. So ID now is equal to for the first instance in the array would be underbar language, underbar first name, and then we split this string on underbar language, and then we take the second entry in the array, which is now going to just give us the ID. So this is going to be equal to, this key value now will either be equal to first name, last name, or city. Then we look up the value in the translation object. So the language that we want to use was passed into this function, and by looking up the translation object, passing in the name of the field that we want to translate, so that will either be last name, first name, or city, and the required language, we get the translated value of the string, and then we just set the inner HTML of the element to the translated value, and this will basically loop over all of the elements doing the translation for us. So if we go back now to running the component, now we can see that when we change languages, the JavaScript now loops over all of the elements that need to be translated and quickly translates the strings from the one language to the other. So the benefit of a client-side approach to doing language translations is that this approach will work in a PhoneGap application where you do not necessarily have a connection to the server, and where the component is not loaded by making an AJAX callback to the server, but the component is loaded from the file system on the device. Thanks very much for watching.